Having successful relationships can be a really tricky thing. How do you communicate to each other? Often you'll say something to your partner which will trigger a response, and then that will trigger a further response, and it'll spiral into an argument. You're not talking to each other for days, and if it goes on for too long, relationships can end. Is there a way of doing it differently? Is there a way that you can communicate and voice what's important to you in a manner that creates a harmonious relationship where you can actually express these things that you might be really nervous about and not want to say because you're worried about the effect that it might have? Is there strategies that you can use to communicate in a more effective way that create a closeness and a oneness together? Let's explore that with Stephanie and Jennifer PageWise as we look at how to create relationships that work effectively.
Welcome to eSHAIR.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. eSHAIR.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning eSHAIR.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to eSHAIR. Here we discuss, promote, and share the benefits to all from living in an egalitarian society, including for men. Inaccurate propaganda leads many men to believe that they miss out with equality. The reality, suppressing women is detrimental to men. Creating a world where everyone can contribute equally makes everyone better off. Now, today, it is my very great pleasure to welcome Jennifer and Stephanie PageWise. Jennifer and Stephanie are quantum relationship coaches who work in the LGBTQ plus community. They focus on creating holy relationships through teaching self-love, boundaries, and communication. They both love to help people find their authentic self and guide them to a life of their dreams. Welcome, Jennifer and Stephanie. How are you today?
We are wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having us on the show.
Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I've been very excited about having you on, looking at some of the work that you do. Before we get into that work, now you will probably remember there was a car, and it was a silver car that Doc Brown invented, and when you hit 88 miles an hour, it went back in time. And do you want to jump in that car? Let's hit 88 miles an hour and go back in time and talk about some of your history, some of the challenges that you've overcome to lead you to what you're doing now.
Awesome. You know, we always talk about the fact that we consider our relationship kind of a fairy tale relationship because it started off really well. You know, a typical relationship that, you know, you have that infatuation and that the chemistry that's there. You know, we knew from the very beginning that we had a connection. And so, you know, we ended up jumping right into a relationship. I came along to the relationship with a 5-year-old son. And, you know, poor Stephanie was like, oh my goodness, what am I getting myself into? I now have to raise a kid. What am I doing? And so, you know, the relationship started off really well. And Stephanie had just finished graduate school, and I was pretty deep in my career already. I had finished graduate school a few years prior to having my son, so it had been a little bit longer. And about a year into our relationship, I had a medical procedure done because I am a chronic pain survivor, I want to call myself at this point. But I was on medication that I did not want to continue taking. And our relationship was at a point where we were like, well, maybe I should have another child so we can raise a kid together from the beginning. And so I needed to get off these medications. And so I had a medical procedure done, and it went terribly wrong. Terribly wrong.
Oh,
And
no.
not only did it leave me with more pain, but it also took away my career. I had to totally give up my career. I became permanently disabled at that point. And we were only a year in our relationship. So that really put a strain on our relationship because, I had lost my sense of who I was. My career was like who I was. I mean, that kind of defined me at that point in my life. I had worked really hard to get where I was in my career. And all of a sudden it was just gone.
Yeah.
I'll let you jump in.
All right. And so that started a 5-year process of us becoming unfrayed or untethered.
Untethered.
Really. I ended up having to take over obviously I took over a lot of the financial needs for the household. And so that became a big focus of mine, but, taking care of a lot of things. And I had already been a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of raising a child. Because
now there was a 6-year-old that needed you.
And now there was a 6-year-old that his bio mom was kind of not up to where she had been before. We'll just put it that way. And so I was doing a lot of the childcare as well. And we started to unravel all of our baggage that we brought with us to the relationship that had been kind of in remission during the honeymoon period started to show up. And we all come to the relationship with baggage, and we had done a pretty good job managing our baggage and knowing that we needed to work through it. But then Jennifer's surgical mishap really put us into hyperdrive with that, and we did unravel. And we ended up splitting up for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was certain that we'd never get back together again.
Yeah.
But we both found our spirituality separately, but found out that within about a year, we both found out that we were on the same spiritual path, which was a little bit unique. We study A Course in Miracles and The Way of Mastery, which are channeled texts, very high vibe things. And it was just surprising to me that Jennifer was part of it. So it opened my eyes to the fact that maybe there was more to this person than I knew. Then, because basically at that point, what I knew was someone who could not meet my needs and I couldn't meet hers. And we were just not destined to be together.
Yeah.
So we became friends again. And then a year later, we started dating again.
Ah, okay.
And now we are getting very close to celebrating our 3rd wedding anniversary.
Wow.
So, that's kind of what brought us to what we do now, because we figured out how to make it work. We figured out that, by doing your own individual work to deal with your own baggage that we all have, because, I know trauma is a big buzzword these days in society, but you can't, and your listeners will probably agree. I don't think there's anybody I've ever met that can't tell me that they haven't had some sort of trauma that has affected them and who they are today as an adult.
Yeah.
But it's what you do with it and how you deal with it and how you heal it. And so, that's what brought us to what we do today, because we have done the work. And we like to teach that to other people, because the stuff that you use in a relationship with a beloved is the same relationship work that you use with your parents, your children, your coworkers, your bosses, the lady at the grocery store. It's all the same relationship work, all the relationship skills.
Yeah. So it sounds like, as you're talking about that, I'm hearing, and I've taken a number of notes, but what I'm hearing is, because from your perspective, from what you experienced, I should say, is that you met, you had this connection, then some issues happened, you broke up, and then you got back together. You found, you both found yourself to a degree. You've got back together, and then you've got married. And the reason I'm highlighting that chain is because what a lot of people, from what I understand, go through is they'll meet each other, and then there's a focus on the marriage without a focus on the relationship. Where you guys seem to have that, well, you worked out your relationship and those issues first, then you got married. But if we go back to that first part where you first met each other, and you had that, you talked about the honeymoon phase, and it was all exciting. And then, I mean, you've got hit with some pretty difficult trauma. I mean, Stephanie's hasn't had a child. She's got a 5-year-old to deal with. And I'm going to use deal with deliberately, because sometimes children you have to deal with. I've got a 14-year-old son. And so there's a big leap there for Stephanie to undertake. But then from both of your perspective, then you've had this decision that you want to have a child together. And then that was taken away from you. That's got to be pretty traumatic to deal with. Do you want to talk us through those emotions and things that you both went through there?
Yeah, for me, it was devastating because, I had my son via artificial insemination. I chose to have him with my previous partner, and that relationship didn't work. And then I was a single parent. And then I met Stephanie, and I was like, wow, maybe I should do this again. And Stephanie wasn't able to have children. So the option wasn't there. I was the only one who was going to be able to conceive. And then that was taken away. So not only did I lose my career, but I lost my ability to have another child.
Wow.
And I was already 42 at that point, I think.
I think so.
I think I was 41 or 42. I was about 41, I think. Yeah, or 40. No, excuse me. I was 42 at that point. So my time clock was already ticking. And then it was taken away, and I just fell apart. Just absolutely fell apart, and didn't know how to take care of anything at that point. It was really, really difficult for me.
And what was worse, it was that I lost sight of the fact of that piece, that we had done it so that she could have a baby, because I just got into superhero mode of, I want to make sure she's okay. And I literally forgot about that. And so I could not support her around that. I was supporting her to just breathe for a while.
Right.
And she did not express to me that was a piece of the puzzle. And so I still feel bad that I didn't know that.
She wasn't even aware of that until we got back together and started talking about what happened and what we could do to fix our relationship. She didn't even realize how detrimental that was to me, because I didn't share it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point I wanted to get to, was that this time here you've had this really, because it wasn't, from the sounds of it, it wasn't the procedure or the results of, well, it was, but the big component of that was the ability not to have a child. Is that the underlying part that made it really difficult for you, Jennifer? Was it this whole thing that you wanted to have a child for you to share together? And then you weren't able to do that. And it sounds like you weren't able to talk about that as well. Am I hearing correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because again, as Stephanie said, it was literally, just making sure that I was eating and drinking and taking care of myself, because I couldn't walk for a while. I was bedridden. I mean, I was in bed probably 23 hours a day. And so we didn't really talk about that. All we were talking about was, have you eaten today? Have you taken care of things? What needs to be done now that I'm home from work? Because, Stephanie had to go make a living, and I was home in bed. Yeah. And, what does our kid need? Does he have homework that needs to be done? Does he need my help? there was no time to discuss the trauma of the procedure in itself and what it had taken away.
So what was that like from your perspective, Stephanie? You're in this relationship. You now, effectively, from what I hear, is you have a child to look after. You've got your partner to look after, who is bedridden, most of the time. You've also got to work full time. Now, imagine, the child was 5 when you first started, so you're still young, I would imagine, when this procedure
Very
happened.
young.
Is that what? Yeah. So was it 7-ish? Because you were
He was
a little
only
bit, or
he was 6.5 when when I had that procedure.
Yeah.
yeah. So 6.5. So still young. So early schoolish
Yeah.
period. A lot of high demand for a child. And so we'll put aside for the moment, because you didn't know that there was this baby, not being able to have a baby issue at that time, because that wasn't communicated. But let's talk about what was that like for you to become into. You've had the experience in relationships before, and you're not, because some people, people that have never had a relationship go back to a teenager being thrown in that position. There's a whole different gamut, but you've had some experience in that space. But still, what was that like for you, what were you thinking about, going, all right, what am I going to do? I've got to look after my partner, I've got to look after a child, I've got to work, financial. What was that like for you? Can you describe that?
I went into full superhero mode, and it was something that was familiar with me. I grew up in a family where I was the eldest child, and there were 3 after me. And my mom was not tremendously capable at times of being a mom. And so I knew well how to take care of things and be in full catastrophe living, and put on that superhero costume. And in some ways, that superhero costume felt very comfortable for me and very safe for me. Because if I had that on, then I was a little bit invincible. So I could shut down my feelings about a lot of things and just go on autopilot and zoom around, take care of everything, be the superhero, and not have any personal needs. That was the story I told myself in my head, of course, while also underneath having these feelings of loneliness and resentment and overwhelm. But I just kept pushing those aside, because there were
you couldn't,
until I couldn't, because there was bigger things. There was a little child who needed me to be on all the time, and she definitely needed me to be on. And so I was, until, several years, it's probably 5 years later. It was 5 years later when I completely melted down, but I held it together for a long time. And did all that stuff also at one point while having 3 jobs, So
Exactly. Well, from that perspective, Jennifer, were you aware, because they're talking about the feelings that Stephanie was having, of feeling lonely, resentment, and I'm sure there's a mixture of other things that were in there in the superhero mode. We'll come back to that in a minute. But were you aware of that at any time? I mean, I understand you were very, very unwell, so maybe that wasn't even possible, but did you have any sense that she was feeling this at the time?
I had some feeling that she was feeling some of these things, because I also came from an upbringing of having to put on a superhero costume as a child. I took care of things. I had a mentally ill mother that I had to tend to most of my upbringing. So the guilt of being the one that she had to care for was crushing me. Yet I didn't know what to do to get out of it.
Yeah.
Because the more I felt guilty, the worse I felt, and then the worse I became, and the more I needed help. And I was spiraling down and down and down to the drain. I didn't know how to get myself out of it. But yes, I was aware that she was struggling, but I didn't know what to do to make it better, because I didn't know how to make myself better.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that, Jennifer, you were feeling, you were incapacitated. And as a result of that, you're feeling guilty that you couldn't contribute and do the things that you felt you should be doing. And that's causing you to feel even worse, and that's
Yes.
causing a spiral. And then Stephanie on the other side as well has gone into superhero phase, and part of that, and you've highlighted the basis for that. If I understand, well, from what I heard, the basis for that was that you could shut off the feelings because you were feeling the resentment, you were feeling lonely. Were two words that you used. I'm sure there's a bunch of other feelings along
Oh
that.
yeah.
So here you are, you have this, and I mean, there is an intimacy that comes with being with a partner, that you have that connection. And it sounds like that was ripped apart. And I use that specifically because all of a sudden Jennifer's in bed and she's feeling guilty. So she's probably not in a great frame of mind either. And maybe justifiably so that she's not, because she was ill, but also to that feeling of guilt. And then you're Stephanie. So what was that like, this superhero? What was it like to have, if you were to go back now and look at it and go, well, I was feeling, what was that loneliness really like? What can you describe that? Because as you say, loneliness and resentment, that's a pretty powerful combination.
Mm-hmm.
What was it really like?
I felt so, I didn't want to talk with Jennifer about my feelings because I didn't want to add to what she was feeling, which I believe in retrospect is why she didn't want to talk to me. And I just desperately wanted her to talk to me, and she couldn't talk to me. And because she couldn't talk to me, I also couldn't talk to her. And it just became this horribly vicious cycle. And it felt so, I mean, I can still feel it. I mean, as we're talking about it,
Yeah, me too.
I can feel it bubbling in my chest, you know, right in my solar plexus, and, you know, which is your love center. And it's just like, it was so horrible. There was so much anxiety about everything. But there was nowhere for the anxiety to go because no one could understand what we were going through. We could only get so much help from the outside. And
there was a little boy who needed us.
Yeah.
And I still needed to be there for him the best that I could.
Right.
Because I'm, you know, no matter what, I'm bio mom. You know, he loves Stephanie. He adores her. I mean, he's almost 19 now. And, you know, he adores her, but I'm still the one who gave birth to him. So there's a certain responsibility to that. And a certain expectation from him that I'm going to provide something for him. So yeah, we got stuck in quite a little mess.
It was a quagmire.
It was a mess.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm loving this because, and sorry, this is not schadenfreude of me getting, pleasure from your pain, because I'm loving it from the way you're opening up and sharing what's going on. Because when I'm hearing what you're saying here is Jennifer was really feeling guilty because she felt she should be contributing and wasn't, and was carrying that by herself, all alone, and as a result of that was feeling worse and worse and worse. And Stephanie on the other side was also wanting, again, loving, thinking, okay, what I need to do is I need to be strong here. I need to be the superhero and make things all okay. But inside is feeling lonely. And as a result of that loneliness, starts to feel resentment, which is then still building on itself. And you're both in a separate spiral, and neither of you spoke to each other about that.
Right.
So when you look back at that now, as a couple and individually, if you were to go back and do that differently, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because I don't know I would do anything different. Because it brought us to where we are today. And if I had done something,
I get that. That's a standard.
But serious, no. But I know that's standard.
Okay, I know what I would have done differently.
What I'm getting to the point of the question, and I understand what your answer is, Jennifer. Sorry to cut you off there. I understand that point of the question. What I'm going is, let's rephrase the question, because the point I want to get to is, let's say that you two now, what you've told me I'm here and I've got my partner here, and I've just told you that story, and we are in that position back then. So we're in two separate rooms, my partner and we've separately confided in you that I'll be Jennifer, and I've said Jennifer, as Jennifer, well, I've said as Damien. Look, I'm incapacitated. I'm feeling guilty about that. I don't want to say anything because I'm worried that it's going to add extra pressure. And then over here, evil Damien. No, sorry, Stephanie.
Oh, gee, thank you.
But we have here, there's my name's Damien Andrews, and the Premier of Victoria is called Daniel Andrews. And everyone asks me, am I related? And I say, well, everyone has an evil twin, is my answer to that question.
I love it.
But what I'm saying is my partner here says, look, Damien's really, really, he's ill, can't do this, and I really want to make sure it's all okay. But I'm feeling lonely, and I'm starting to resent that. And so, if you were looking at that situation, what advice would you give, given the knowledge you've got? That's how I'd like to rephrase the question, if that's okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that I would say to somebody, if they were telling me that this was their story, is that you've got to do the hard stuff. You've got to communicate, even if it seems as though you're going to hurt someone's feelings. I think it hurts their feelings and the relationship worse by not communicating. And that you must get it all out on the table. Because how are you going to fix it if no one knows?
That's the point I was getting to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about from your point, Stephanie? Do you have a similar thing or anything to add to that?
Absolutely. If I could go back and do it differently, Jennifer had an amazing, and I think look back at it and it's totally adorable. But in the moment, I was absolutely furious with her. When she didn't want to talk to me, she would literally pull the covers over her head. I would have sat there on the floor, waiting for her to come out again. I would have just held space and said, I'm here when you're ready, because I need to know what's going on for you. I need to know I love you. I cannot live in this vacuum any longer. If you have to tell me that you are done with me, whatever it is you have to tell me, I need it, because this desert that we're living in, I can't do anymore. I'm dying of thirst for connection.
Yeah, I love that, because that connection, you both needed that connection, and it's definitely you needed it to be able to go, hey, look, I'm here, and I need to be connected and understand and connect with what's going on. And Jennifer, whether it sounds like, I mean, you realize it now, but at that time you didn't realize you were thinking you were adding a burden to the relationship, whereas actually sharing your information actually doesn't. And I relay that, and I really wanted to get into that because I often, when talking about people, I don't know if you remember the movie Crocodile Dundee, because I'm an Aussie, and I know that movie, and, and I'm sure a lot of people do as well. But there's a scene in the movie where they're in a high-rise function in New York, and it comes up about psychiatrists, and he's like, "Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned psychiatry." And the lady said, "No, it's okay. Psychiatry, if you have a problem, you go to a psychiatrist. You talk about your problem and get it out in the open." And then she's, "Oh, you probably don't have a psychiatrist at Walkabout Creek." And he goes, "No, we just have a Wally. If you have a problem, you tell Wally. Wally tells everybody else. No more problem." And that's where I was just wondering from that, and that's why I wanted to get to that, because it just seems so simple that we fear and are really worried about if we say what's for us, that's going to cause a problem. And that's where I wanted to talk to you and get your thoughts on the communication. If you think about your communication, if you had said, for example, I'll take Stephanie first. If Stephanie, you had said, "I'm feeling alone. Can you tell me what's going on for you?" as opposed to, "Jennifer, you don't ever talk to me." Now, that's a slight difference, but aiming at the same thing. Do you get where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah.
Because I find a lot of communication problems go, "You're doing this, you're doing that," as opposed to saying, "I'm feeling this." Do you want to expand on that in your relationship and how that?
100%. I mean, and we teach a lot of this to folks,
Mm.
is that
Mm.
you got to take ownership of your
Yeah.
feelings. And we started, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but when we got back together, we made a pact that we were going to own our triggers. And if Stephanie said something that triggered me, I was like, I felt triggered by that. Not you did that. I feel triggered by that. And why? Because I could have been triggered because of something my mother said to me as a little girl that made me feel bad.
Yeah.
And now Stephanie said something, and when she said it, it made me feel bad because of what happened to me as a kid. How is she supposed to know that if I don't tell her what you just said triggered me, and this is why? And I'm taking full ownership of how I feel and why I feel that way.
Yeah, I love that. Do you want to add to that, Stephanie?
She went exactly down the path that I was going to go. And that is exactly, we have turned around the typically taught communication process, which is when you said this, I felt this, because it starts out with the other person. And what we've done is turned that around and said, ooh, I'm feeling this.
Yeah.
And this is what it makes me think of, without ever mentioning the other person in the room. It's just like, oh, I'm having this experience. And then we can talk out how we got to that experience.
Because you're not putting up a wall and getting like all of a sudden, if someone says, when you said this, I felt that, doesn't that make you feel defensive?
100%.
Because I did something 100%. First, right? Yeah. Whereas if I'm saying to you, oh my goodness, I just felt triggered and this is why. I've taken 100% ownership of my reaction to anything in the world.
And it's interesting the way that you put it, I'm feeling lonely. I honestly believe that we call it chapter 1 and chapter 2 with an intermission. So that's how we talk about our relationship.
I can't wait for the third act. That's going to be so exciting.
We're working on it. But in chapter 1, I don't know that even if I would have told Jennifer, I feel lonely, I still think that she was in such a place.
I would have felt guilty.
That she would have just felt more guilty. She had gotten herself so far away. But then had I been in a better place and I said that and she reacted, like now I could still hold space for her reaction. Then I did not have the ability to hold space for her reaction because I was so wounded.
Yeah.
So at this point, I own my wounds. I've worked on them. I know what I need to do with them when they show up. And there are so many fewer than there were 15 years ago. I've done a great deal of healing and forgiveness work within myself. So it was a ping pong game. We just were pinging off of each other. And we couldn't get out of the cycle.
Yeah, I love that. I really wanted to touch on that because for me, and I talk about this a lot in the work that I do and in the work, certainly because I mostly work with large corporates, but there's still people. There are people in there that make up an organization. And one of the things that I share is in my belief, it took me a long time to learn it, but the life is easy. There's simple principles. If you follow them, life is easy. And they're truths whether you believe them or not. And the example is if you go to the 22nd floor of a building and step off the balcony, even if you don't believe gravity exists, you're going to go down. It's just that's the law. And I think there's these universal laws that make a difference and make life easy. And that's why I really wanted to get to that point. I love that you guys were quite comfortable sharing that because what you've highlighted there is a principle of in my belief, my opinion is a principle of communication, that if you talk about things from your perspective, what you're experiencing, it removes the defensiveness from the other side. And I had that the other day, 2 days ago with someone, and I was feeling really pissed off. And I said, I'm feeling really pissed off with this situation. And we went our separate ways. briefly, came back, and it was fine because it was me. That was my feeling. That's what I'm feeling. It wasn't you. So they didn't come back and get all defensive and say, how dare you accuse me of this? I just said, I'm feeling pissed off with that. Needed a bit of space to process it. And then it was all fine, and everything was just fine and dandy very, very quickly. And that's where I just really wanted to highlight that, because you talk about, and you mentioned, and I want to get into this, is you mentioned self-healing and forgiveness work. But let's talk about the self-healing. Well, they kind of go together.
They sure do.
Do you want to talk about this process? Because it sounds like in the intermission, you talk about part 1 and part 2. In the intermission, it sounds like there's a fair bit of self-healing and forgiveness work in there. Do you want to both explain a bit about that process, if I heard that correctly, or is that where the majority of
that's where the healing definitely began, for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
it definitely began. Yeah. And I think that there is a time when you have to go and walk in the wilderness on your own. And you need to come face to face with your true self. And sometimes you can't do that when you're walking with someone else.
Yeah.
Because you're too worried about whether they're keeping up or whether they're getting ahead, all those things. You're paying attention to someone else. Yeah. And I needed that time. And I can only speak for myself. Jennifer can speak for herself. I needed that time to come face to face with myself in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And the wilderness of my life, myself. And what that meant was I did find, I've always been a very spiritual person, and I've always been a student of spiritual practices. And I dug into it even more deeply after she and I split up. And I was the person who decided that I needed to go. So Jennifer was feeling, she was the one who was left. And so it was very heartbroken. I was very heartbroken about it as well, but I knew that it was best for them as well as for me. I'm also, my work, my career is as a social worker and as a therapist. So, I'm a student of psychology. I'm a student of spirituality. And I started applying those principles in a new way. And I started working with some new people in my life who were also walking a life of integrity and being very aligned with spiritual law. And they helped me by showing me the way to clear out the nonsense from my life. So that I could be, and all the way down to making sure that my bank account was properly looked after, I was, I had a system for my life. And it wasn't, I had just kind of been following, I kind of been wagging the dog before. I had the tail of the tiger, and life was flipping me around, and I knew enough not to let go, and I could swim pretty well. I'm fixing my metaphors all over the place. Sorry, it's one of my major talents.
I make up words, so that's fine.
Okay. And so I cleared up my life personally. I could say that, my finances were in good order. My health was in good order. I was right with my higher self, my spirit. I call it, God, the creator. I have lots of different words for that connection with all that is. And I just got really clear about who I am and how I fit in the world. At that point, it's still evolving. Please know that this is still an ongoing awakening process.
Fully get that, do we?
No, I don't think we're meant to get there. But it's being integrity with yourself. And so that when I was with other people, I didn't get pulled off of myself. So I just became very strong in my selfhood. And in very much through a spiritual practice. I believe there are some spiritual truths that have, just cleaned things out for me. We study this book called The Way of Mastery, and it's a channeled text. And there are axioms in there, like I am the person who sources my experience of all things, which means that whatever's happening in the world, my perception of it is my truth.
Right. Yeah.
So I started taking responsibility for how the world was.
Mm.
I was no longer a victim of the world.
I love that.
I love it, and all events are equal. Oh, if all events are equal, then that thing that I say is horrific and that thing that says maybe not so horrific, I don't have to compare those things anymore. We just look at the experience of it and deal with the experience. It takes you off of that hierarchy. Well, your pain's worse than me. I'm supposed to feel sorry for you. Or my pain is less than, so I don't count.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody's equal.
Yeah.
Huge confidence builder.
Yeah, I love that. And Jennifer, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, ask Jennifer from her process as well. Can you talk through, because I mean, you're in a very, very vulnerable situation. I mean, I fully respect Stephanie's position where she was all alone and made that decision to go out, which I imagine was well, she said it was heartbreaking. Jennifer, from your perspective, you're there. You've got a medical condition. You're suffering. You're all alone. The person that you love, who you didn't want to tell everything because you didn't want to burden them, is now leaving you alone. How do you go from that to then starting this journey of self-awareness and responsibility, and talk us through that process? Because that must have been, some people could go, oh, it's all over then, but you seem to find something
tough
to move forward. Yeah, so talk us through that.
It was a really tough situation for me because Stephanie walked away, and I respect her 100% for it now. I get it. I understand why she had to do what she did. But back then, I was just absolutely heartbroken. So, yes, I had a medical condition and I was in very bad physical shape, unable to walk. I was on crutches. I was getting, I was fitted for a wheelchair and told that I would never walk again. And I had an 11-year-old son. And we didn't even mention the fact that our child had special needs on top of it. So he's got high functioning autism. And so for me, when Stephanie walked away, my motivation for starting my journey at the time was for my kid, because I didn't have enough inside of me to think I was worth it. But I knew that he was, and that he needed me, because now I didn't have Stephanie to help. And here was my 11-year-old son looking at me saying, okay, Mom, what's next? Where are we going in life? So that was my initial motivation, was, oh my God, my kid needs me. I need to figure out a way to get well for him. And so I started on my journey of, what do I do? And it was crazy because you know how as you are flipping through Facebook and if you do a search on Google, then all of a sudden these ads start popping up of all these different things that, have to do with the stuff that you're searching. And I was searching for programs for self-love. So I'm like, oh my God, I've got to figure out how to love myself here. And all of a sudden this program popped up on my Facebook feed that said 40-day program to better self-love. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. It's 40 days. What do I have to lose? I have a kid that needs me. And so I got into this 40-day program, and it just so happened to be the person who ran the 40-day program followed A Course in Miracles, same study that Stephanie was working on. And it was something brand new to me because I was raised in Judaism. So my spirituality was always based on religion, not on what was outside of the box of religion. And so for the first time in my life, my eyes were opened up to something that was bigger than anything I had ever known in my life. And I was like, whoa. And just a light bulb went off. And I mean, I get goosebumps now just even talking about it. It just changed my world. And little by little, the more I was studying this work and understanding that I'm not a victim of this world.
Mm.
I'm not a victim of myself. I'm not a victim of anybody. That I have the power all within me because I'm a human being, a spiritual being having human experience. So that spiritual being had to take charge and take the wheel.
Yeah.
And so that's where my journey began. And little by little, the more I started studying this spiritual work, I started feeling better. I started being able to walk. Now I ride a bike, I kayak. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still have chronic pain that as I said, I'm a chronic pain survivor. So it's still there, but it doesn't rule my life anymore.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it began for me. And it just skyrocketed into just the full understanding that I am not a victim of this world and that I do have some control in what happens to me and to my surroundings.
So what's the difference now? If you look at both of you now, there's a question to both of you. And so I'll get both your opinion on that. So both of you now, back to both of you then, and linking this to the self-love component, because, and linking the self-love component and the communication component, how much of that non-communication at the time was, I'm going to say lack of, for want of better words, lack of self-love at the time, being self-love, self-respect, saying, hey, I need this. How much of that linkage is important to have correct balance with? I'm told you. See, English my second language. So I don't have a first one. I stumble a little bit, but I think you get the gist of the question. It's, you know, this connection between self-love. If you were to look at yourself now with the self-love that you have, because taking from what you had said before, there's no way that you would do what you did before in the past. If you had an issue, Jennifer, if you were in that same position, you'd say, I'm feeling guilty because I feel like I should be doing more and I can't. And Stephanie, you would be saying, I'm feeling alone. I need some sort of connection. That's what I'm getting from you, was what you would do now. How important it is to find that self-love, to be able to communicate that way rather than the reverse. Because a lot of people say, oh, communicate. But if you don't have that self-love, how can you do it? Can you expand on that?
You really can't do it well because, you can't give from an empty cup. And when you do, you eventually run dry. And that's what happened to Stephanie. She was giving to everyone and everything but herself. So we have to give to ourselves first. It is not selfish. It's selfless. If I love me, I have more to give to her and to the whole world because my cup's full and overflowing now. So it's overflowing. So now I can give to you and I can give to you and I can give to you as long as I keep giving back to me first.
Yeah. And Stephanie, from your perspective, how do you?
Well, I guess the lack of self-love is what I often see. When there's a lack of self-love, there's a preponderance of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And when you're in shame, do you feel that you have a right to speak? Do you feel that you can make a valid statement? Because you feel invalid. So no, I couldn't even come up with what I truly deserved because my shame storm that I was swimming in was saying, well, this is what you signed up for in this lifetime.
Right. You don't deserve anything.
You're never going to be happy. You haven't done anything to be happy. That's what I believed underneath it all. So even though I was resentful, but the resentment was towards myself in many ways, because I was like, see, you thought this one was going to be better, didn't you? See, you still picked wrong, or you still did this wrong. I mean, so it just kept turning back on myself, and I did not feel, I couldn't even find the right words, because really by saying I feel lonely, that's looking at my own needs authentically. I wasn't being authentic. I was being Superman. That was not authentic. So any communication that I would give was from Superman, not really authentically me. So it didn't work. There wasn't authenticity. There wasn't patience. There wasn't even much love. Because as Jennifer said, you can't pour from an empty cup. And or you can pour from what's inside the cup, which was guilt and shame. And so if I was communicating, I bet that sometimes I was communicating guilt and shame without even realizing it. So how well is she going to respond to that? Not so well. And so we just continue the ping pong game.
So this self-love component, because I love what you said there, you mentioned haven't done anything to deserve it. Yeah. Now, that's an interesting thought process, and I hear that a lot, where people, where is the line where you deserve it? Or is it a case when you actually truly love yourself, there is no line because there isn't a line at all? Is that where we're getting to? It's you deserve it because you are. Is that
exactly?
Because you exist.
Yes. Yeah. It's not about doing, it's about being.
Yeah.
Because you are, you deserve to be loved. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to be heard.
What's that awakening like when you realize
that? I'll even tell you.
For those listening, there were some amazing reactions there where arms went up the air. It's like, oh my God, amazing light coming through. I'm just describing that for people listening because that just looked beautiful.
Absolutely. Sorry, and I bet y'all can hear it from where we were speaking about the painful times.
Yeah.
And the angst that you probably started to feel when you were thinking about those things in your own life. And then when you feel that moment of relief and joy and, or when you're climbing a mountain and you finally get to the top and you can see the vista, it's like, oh, yeah, that's what this was all about.
Yeah.
And it's that feeling, and it's the goosebumpy feeling. It's like, oh yeah, that's it.
So Jennifer, how have you helped people make that realization themselves? Is there any key to it? Or, is just a switch you can do, or is there a step process you have to go through? What are your points to this? Because, I'm a being, and therefore I'm worthy of complete and utter love. How do you get someone to that point?
Well, you have to break down the walls and get through people's armor. We talk about people being armored up and that you have all this armor on that nobody can get through. And so we have to work with people to figure out, first of all, what's causing the armor. So is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it that I've been unfaithful to my spouse? What is it that's causing this? Is it that I was abused as a child? What caused you to put all of that armor on so nobody can get in? And then as we start to help people get through that armor and come up with better skills to deal with stressful situations, because no matter what, we can talk about the fact that, just because I am a being, I deserve this. But there are things that are going to happen in life that are still going to cause us to get triggered. And we're not going to feel that we deserve something good because of it. So we have to help people understand what those triggers are, how to communicate them with people without pointing fingers, and just taking ownership of your own triggers and being able to put up some boundaries so people don't walk all over you. So these are the kind of skills that we teach people so that they can kind of have that shift in realizing that, yes, they do deserve all the love that's out there for them.
Yeah, I want to touch on 2 points with that. I love that. This armor up. I haven't heard that before. I love that analogy that people have this armor up. And what I want to add to that was because of the statement that I use, I think I made it up, but maybe I didn't. Maybe subconsciously I heard it somewhere. But at the moment, I'm going to say it's mine until someone corrects me. But it's unlike real walls. Barriers are in your mind. The barriers in your mind are only there because you choose them to be there. And I deliberately use that phrasing because when you use that phrasing, It's like, if I'm choosing it to be there, I can choose it to unbe there, to not be there, to be
Mhm.
completely free. And that's where I wanted to talk about, what you were talking about there, Jennifer, in the respect of your armor up, is this separation. Because we'll be talking about, um, you know, as a being, I deserve love. Now, some of the behaviors I do can be quite shitty. And I look at my own background. An example was, I was helping a friend. This is sometime many years ago, about 20 odd years ago. I was helping a friend with their wedding. And I was out the front of the church guiding people, that kind of thing. And there was a space for the bridal car to pull up. Now, there was no markings on it saying bridal car pulling up or anything like that. Or it was just a car park there. And someone went and parked there. So I've stormed down and gone, what the hell are you parking there for? Where's the bride going to park? They weren't to know. But I look at that and I can go, okay, I'm a shitty person because I behaved that way. Or I can go, I'm a person of love. And that was, maybe I need to learn from that and communicate a little bit differently. How much of that is, this being able to have that self-love and then accept our abilities and skills as a human being by separating the two, separating who you are as a being from your behaviors? How much of that is important to become aware of?
I'll let you dig into that one.
I think it's a big piece of what we need to become aware of. And we talk about the concept of radical acceptance, and that if we can just look at those things as something that happened, and this is where we teach some of these axioms that I spoke of earlier, which is all events are neutral. I am giving it all the meaning that it ever had. So if this piece of bad behavior is neutral, okay, so why did it happen? It happened because I was afraid, or it happened because I was having a bad day and I was thinking about something else, or, any number of things. And you can understand it and say, well, oh, so it was a reaction to a stimulus. And we really we pull it back a little bit into that really sterile place of psychology, behaviorism, which is action reaction. It's like, okay, well, there was this thing that happened and this reaction, and then there was this action and this reaction. And so you could start seeing how all of these things are interconnected. And it's like, well, I can just choose to take a step back, take a breath, and respond instead of react. And so we help people just slow this down and take a really clear look at things without so many emotions.
And you change the trajectory of a relationship or even just a conversation by changing one little thing from reaction to response.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really excited by the way you were talking there, where you wrote, and I wrote down here, all events are neutral. Because, I have a different version of that, but I refer to Shakespeare, who said nothing's good or bad, or wrote nothing's good or bad, thinking makes it so. And from your perspective, because my take on that is, because a lot of the conversation is, or think positive, but if you think positive, that means there's got to be a negative, or, and you've got to fight against that. And I can see you rolling your eyes there, Stephanie. Can you want to explain that, please? Please go.
Well, a couple things about the think positive movement. Number one, it's kind of gaslighting, because sometimes things just suck.
They're not positive.
I am not going to think positive about this. No, I'm not going to do it. But you're right. Then there's also that, well, I've got to pull myself all the way from such a negative place, all the way to the opposite side. So what if I come up with someone who is very, very negative, I say, okay, could you possibly just try to interpret this as neutral? And then decide how you feel about it and what you think about it. It's a whole lot easier to get to the middle than it is to the other side.
Yeah.
So, I love that. And I didn't even realize I have heard that line from Shakespeare before. I had not connected them to that. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, scene 2, act 2 from Hamlet.
Very good, very good.
I think there's a phrase in the Bible about that too. I can't remember. I butcher it every time I try and do it, so I'm not going to do it. But there
I'm
was something
sure
along those
there
lines.
is.
And I
Yeah.
know Bruce Lee said it as well. Thinking makes it so, or something along those lines. Yeah. Anyway.
It's true. And how many of us have had an experience where we used to think something was one way, and then we grow up and it's 5 years later and you're like, oh my goodness.
I used to believe that.
Oh, wow. And so go ahead.
Oh, because I was going to, what you'd said there was I was going to ask you to touch on that, because you just, as you were saying, that is our beliefs. And because a lot of the times we believe our beliefs are true, as opposed to, as in the truth. But then, because you said we've got this thing, and then 5 years later we go, oh, maybe not. How much of that, do you want to talk about that awareness of your own beliefs and how that's filtering what you're experiencing?
Yes, absolutely. So we do a lot of, we've got some new areas of exploration that's called somatic attachment theory.
Right.
And we're actually in a certification program right now for somatic attachment therapy. And I love it because it really connects with how we've interpreted the things that have happened to us in our past. Sometimes as very small children, sometimes as older folks, my age. But
I'm
as
50, so I'm not asking your age, because you should never ask a lady her age, but I'm 50.
We're in the same generation.
Who's a lady around here? I want to know.
You're two lovely ladies. I'm enjoying this conversation.
As am I. But if you interpreted some rule about the world at the age of 4, and you are still stuck there at some point, so the triggers that we talk about often go way back to those very early times, sometimes pre-verbal.
Right, yeah.
So if you get triggered, all of a sudden you're interpreting the world through the lens of a 3-year-old or a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And we're living from we're not in our frontal cortex anymore. We're living from our brainstem. When we're triggered, we're in fight or flight.
Yeah.
So the biology says we're not thinking much anymore. We're just reacting.
Yeah, I love that.
So
Jennifer, do you want to take us? Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, Jennifer, do you want to take us back to explaining those triggers, how we identify, if we've had a trigger, as Stephanie says, from when you were 3, and now we're still reacting from that, how do we go back and find that? Or do we have to go back and find that? Can we just change it? Can you talk us through that process?
The work that we do with people is, we don't want to re-traumatize people, and I know that there are certain types of therapies out there that bring you right back into that major trauma in your life. I don't want to go back and traumatize someone if they were physically abused, sexually abused, or any kind of abuse that caused these triggers. We don't want to do that to people, because then you're re-traumatizing people. Yeah. But what we do want to do is, when you have something happen, we want to go back and say, okay, where do you feel that in your body? And start feeling the sensation. And then we can say, okay, when do you think you started feeling that sensation? And go back and help them see that happened, that sensation started when I was a kid. Okay, it started when you were a kid. Can we kind of go back and try to figure out where it came from? And then we can help them deal with the sensation, not the actual event, but deal with the sensation within their body and reconnect, so that when something else happens, that's not where their body goes to. So it takes away the trigger.
Yeah. So you don't have to go back and
it.
experience the trauma. You can just know this is the trigger, and going forward, and by the sounds of it, creating a new habit just by repetition. Sounds very quickly from the way the two of you work. You all of a sudden, you don't even have to consciously know what it is. You've just got a trigger, and you've got a new reaction to how you trigger.
You learn how to self-soothe.
You learn how to self-soothe. You have self-regulation and co-regulation. So you learn how to self-regulate, and sometimes you co-regulate. And that means we communicate, and we say, you know what, I'm triggered. Can you hold space for me? Can you put some calming music on for me? Can you pour me a glass of wine? Whatever it may be, if I need someone to help me, I can reach out to Stephanie and say, you know what, I just need you right now because I'm triggered. And is there some way that you can help me deal with these feelings? And she doesn't even have to know what I'm feeling, just that I need her to hold space for me and help.
I love that the point you just mentioned there, because sometimes people feel that they've got to, the other person has to understand everything that's going on for them, and is that, and because I find that, you know, I'll put it in this context. I'm a male, and I can read all the books I want on childbirth. I can interview all the women on childbirth, but there's no way I can understand what childbirth is like. It's just not possible. And so I put, using that context, if you're having a feeling and trying to explain what that means to you, to the other person, I would say it's almost impossible. You can get an idea, but the person is going to filter it through their own information.
Their own lens. Right. You filter it through. I mean, if I was physically abused, yet you never were, how are you going to be able to fully understand what it felt like for me being physically abused? You're not. But you can understand what I'm feeling inside. You can feel, you can understand that my stomach's getting tight, and or that I'm getting short of breath, or you know, whatever it is that's going on inside me when I get triggered, because you might have those same feelings for something else.
And how much? Oh, go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah.
It's less about what the person is experiencing than the fact that I can handle my own stuff that's coming up from there. So, well, if Jennifer's having an experience, I don't necessarily have to know what's going on because I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just trying to be here for it and to support her while she experiences it. So we step back from that need to fix, because fixing is doing. And remember, we're human beings, not human doings. And so it changes the paradigm. It takes us out of this 3D Western society. I've got to be doing something to be of value.
I've got to fix everything.
She does not need she does not need me to fix her. She just needs me to be with her so that she can have this experience and not be judged, not be pressured, so that she can have a different experience with what's happening for her.
Yeah, I love that.
So it takes the pressure off of both of us. Because all we're doing is allowing her to have that. Because a lot of times when we've been hurt, we don't get to feel our feelings because the person who's hurt us isn't around to hear about it, doesn't want to hear about it, doesn't care to hear about it. Or if we were really little, we didn't know how to talk about it. So there may not be any need for words. There might just be, I need to experience this.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on this because, and I know it's my resolution for the year, but we're talking about listening. Because sorry, I didn't give you context there.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know we're almost in March as this is recording, but for me, we got to New Year. You're supposed to set New Year's resolutions, and for me, I'd already had my goals and the intentions that I wanted, and all that was set out. So I'd come to New Year, and I've gone, I don't really have anything to set as a New Year resolution. I've already got the things that I want to achieve, and the way I want to live my life. That's pretty clear. And then in a conversation, it came up because I believe I'm a very good listener. But then I thought about it more, and I just thought how powerful listening is. So I went, okay, I'm going to take this to a new level. That's going to be my New Year's resolution. I'm going to focus on listening. And when you're talking about being, you're a being. A person is a being. So And the way to resolve these issues is actually just to be there for the person, not to try and fix it, as you said, not to do anything, but just to be. Now, if we're listening, we're truly listening, then that's pretty hard to fail as a being, would be my interpretation. Is that, am I oversimplifying it, or do you want to expand on that?
I don't think you're oversimplifying at all. I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head. That if we
Yeah.
are truly listening, and active listening is not trying to think about what am I going to say next. It's
Mm.
just listening to what someone
Yeah.
is saying and taking it in and just holding space. Most
Mm.
of the time when someone is struggling, they don't want you to fix it. They just want you to
Mm.
hear them.
Yeah, that's interesting, because what I'm wondering about, and I've kind of avoid social media now generally, because what I find is, and I'm just wondering whether we need to do this a lot with listening, because a lot of times listening is probably more about asking questions than stating what you've had. And I find if you go on social media, someone will say something, and then someone will say, "No, that's not the case. This is the case," and there'll be this big hoo ha, and this thing's gone viral because there's this conflict about it, and next thing, it's constant new things going through pretty much the same foundation across it. How much of that is, if we're going to teach someone to listen, is where I want to go to with that, is switching back, because that was when I made that transition many years ago to being a good listener. It was about not social media, because it wasn't, that was going back many years where it really wasn't on social media much. And I made the thing to, because how someone triggered me and said, um, when people talk, we're often thinking about what we're going to say as opposed to really listening to what the other person. And I heard that, and I went, actually, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm actually not, even if I forget what I'm thinking about, often I'll have a notepad or something with me. So if something pertinent comes up, and we talked about this in the pre-show, was sometimes I'll be taking notes so I can jot something down to remember, and I can then go back to focusing on listening. How do you advise people to, okay, listening is really important, and this is how you listen as a new skill, rather than trying to think about what you've got to say because you feel that you need to validate yourself for whatever reason, but actually just yeah, I love both of your expressions when I say something, so for the audience that are just listening, because there's these beautiful eye rolls and stuff. It's great. But yeah, how much of it is this thing where we're not listening because we feel, and this is, I think, linking back to self-love, where we've got to say stuff, as opposed to just listening because we just want to be with the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is a skill that, and one of the important skills that we teach, because we aren't taught to listen.
Yeah.
We're taught that, you always have something that you need to say and give your opinion. And that is just the way society teaches us growing up, that, the one who has more to say is going to be more successful. That's not always true. I don't want to talk to someone who thinks that they know everything. I know a few people in my life that are like that, and I avoid them at all costs. And because, no, I don't know everything. I don't express that I do, and I don't teach people that they need to.
Yeah.
And you said an interesting word, validate myself. I have to, when in speaking.
So your reaction to that.
Yeah. And that is exactly how it goes back to self-love. If you love yourself, you are valid. And so you don't have to do anything to be valid.
Yeah.
And so it becomes easier to just sit and listen and wait and trust that you will have a response at the end of someone's share that is meaningful and what they need.
Yeah. I love that statement. If you love yourself, you are valid. I haven't heard that put that way before, but I really love that. That's awesome. And I know we've spent a bit of time on this. Partly, I mean, one of SHAIR's first principle is personal responsibility, being responsible for your own actions and your own thoughts. And I know you're talking about self-love, and you've talked about self-responsibility there. And that's just so connect with what you're talking about, and as a foundation for your own self, and also how you connect with others. I really love that. I do want to get on to, you talk about boundaries as well. That's one of the key things you mentioned about. Do you want to give us a background of what you mean by boundaries? Because you say, you're creating holy relations through teaching self-love, which you've covered. Then you've got boundaries and communication. We've kind of touched on communications, but we haven't really got into the boundaries part. Do you want to explain what you mean by boundaries, and how we set them, or what we should set, what we shouldn't set? If you want to take that away.
Sure. I mean, as kids, we aren't taught we're allowed to have boundaries. As a kid, kids are to be seen and not heard. So we're not allowed to say what's okay with us and what's not okay. And that's truly what a boundary is. What's okay with me and what's not okay. That is a boundary. So, and everybody has the right to have them. And everybody's boundaries are a little different. What's okay for you doesn't mean it has to be okay for me. And for me to say, well, because it's okay with me, it better be okay with you, is not respecting your boundary. So, there are three kinds of boundaries. There are rigid boundaries where it's like, oh, this is absolutely
non-negotiable.
A non-negotiable. Like, you are not going to come into my home and take my things. That's a boundary. You're not coming into my home. You're not going to steal my things. I have a boundary. Yeah. Or you have very loose boundaries where, it's okay that you do this because, well, you're my kid. And so I can be a little more fluid and allow you to get away with certain behaviors that maybe I wouldn't allow other people to. Because
ice cream comes to mind.
Right. You want ice cream for breakfast? Oh, well, okay, maybe today. So you're a little more flexible and loose. And then you have what's considered healthy. And that's where it's sort of like a mix. So, I think to me, a healthy boundary is somewhere in the middle because again, my boundary with you may be different than my boundary with my wife. So it may be the same. It may be the same concept where, I'm going to let my wife go into my purse because she's my wife, but I'm not going to let you go into my purse. Right. I mean, so it's okay that boundary
has some flexibility
in it.
Yeah. I get where the context you're talking about. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
We also talk about having internal boundaries with what's okay for my own behavior and what's not okay for my own behavior. So is it okay for me to not balance my checkbook and to be irresponsible with my money? Oh, no, it's really not, because that makes me feel anxious and I don't want to feel anxious. So,
is healthy eating important to me? So for me, I happen to be a vegetarian, and I'm a vegetarian because meat doesn't agree with me. So I have an internal boundary that I'm not going to eat meat, because if I do, I'm going to be sick. Yeah. So why do I want to do that to myself? So that is an internal boundary that I have, that I follow a vegetarian diet. Does that mean that you have to be a vegetarian? Absolutely not. But it's a boundary I have for me.
Yeah. How do you, and is it, sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Go ahead.
I was going to say from that perspective, because when we've got rigid boundaries, and we're talking about relationship, your internal boundaries is understanding that, and I think we probably covered a lot of that when we're talking about self-love and things like that. But when we're talking about a relationship, and we talked about knowing who you are and yourself, is it really important to understand what your rigid boundaries are when you're starting a relationship? And because if someone's crossing those rigid boundaries, I've heard someone said to me once, it's like when you first meet someone, that's the best you're going to get. After that, it goes down the hill a little bit because of all the other things. Yeah, they do fart, and they do,
Yeah.
you don't do at the start. How important is it to be clear about what is right for you as far as those boundaries, and then say, well, if someone doesn't meet those rigid boundaries, not expecting that they're going to change and go, hey, maybe this is not right, and then tapping into that self-love and going, hey, I can walk away because there's what, seven odd billion people on the planet, and then if you're, if you're, whichever way it is, if you're straight, you've got the other half, and if you're not straight, you've still got your half. So there's still 3 point something billion, and if you're bi, you've got 7 billion. There's a lot of people.
Oh my gosh.
So how much of it is, taking that into context and going, all right, I need to be clear on what before even thinking about a relationship, I need to be clear that I'm ready for a relationship, as in I know what my rigid boundaries are. How important is that?
I think it's hugely important. And that's why we talk a little bit about the internal boundaries. Am I able to set my own boundaries with myself?
Yeah.
Because if I can't set them with myself, I'm not going to be able to set them with somebody else.
I love that. Yeah.
That's where that concept comes from with us, because I realized that if I couldn't behave in integrity, then I couldn't expect to be able to set boundaries with any integrity.
Yeah.
So it is important. And so we talk about all the different types of boundaries, and there's more than I ever thought. There's financial, sexual, emotional, mental, and time boundaries, all kinds of different ways. And so we go through those with folks so that they can truly define what's okay with them and what's not okay with them. So that when they do go back to their relationship or into a relationship, they're clear on them. Because if you don't know what your boundaries are, you don't know what red flags to look for.
Yeah, definitely. Because I can imagine, I'm thinking about yourselves when you started the relationship, you had a 5-year-old. There might be boundaries there between, what the other person can and can't do with your child. I know from my perspective, my ex-wife now, but who was with, she had 2 daughters from previous marriage, and there was a very clear boundary as to where I could and couldn't discipline things in that regard. So that's, there's all these sort of things. How does a person work out? Firstly, what their personal boundaries are, their internal boundaries are. And then what about communicating that with someone else as well? How do you go about communicating that with someone to say, hey, this is my boundary? Do you just go, first date, okay, here's my boundaries, blah, 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 blah. Or, is it a different way of doing that? Jennifer, do you want to expand on that a little bit? Or?
Yeah, I don't think I would go on my first date and hand someone a list of these are my boundaries. But you would hope that, in having conversation with somebody as you're getting to know them before you go on a first date, that some of these things are going to come up in conversation as to what's acceptable. Like for me, I can't imagine ever having a relationship with someone who's a smoker. It just turns my stomach. So if I'm on a dating site and I see someone says they're a smoker, I probably am not even going to start a conversation with that individual because I know that is something that I just am not willing to deal with. So I guess, for me, it's teaching people that it's okay to have boundaries first and foremost. And that's part of the self-love and self-care that we teach people. Because as I said, when we grow up as kids, we're not necessarily taught that it's okay that we have them. So we have to teach people that it is okay to have them, to be clear and know what their boundaries are. So we talk about what the types of boundaries are, because again, I had no idea that what's a time boundary? What do you mean a time boundary? Well, you know what? I don't like when people are late all the time. And then you have some people who are chronically late. That can cause a problem in a relationship. If someone is really rigid about being on time and you have someone who's never on time, imagine what problems that could cause. So it is okay to start talking about these things, but I'm not going to hand someone a list on my first date. No, I think that's a little rigid for me.
Stephanie?
But having done the work of understanding what's okay with you and what's not okay with you is important, because as you're talking, as Jennifer was saying, you can be listening for key words. Like I once had someone show up to a date like 45 minutes late, and I was only still there because I had ordered dinner. And but I knew that there was no way that I was going to ever tolerate that again. Had I not already ordered dinner because I was famished, I would not have still been there. Because I was like, no, it's not happening. So having the idea, I think it's important that we have that internal healthy relationship with ourselves, so that we can understand what we want with someone else. As a friend, as a boss, as a coworker, so that we can share openly. And again, if we care about ourselves and we believe that we are valid, it's safe to say, hey, that's not okay with me. Can we come up with a different way to do that? Or, no, that's not going to work for me. But be respectful and trust that they are going to be a grown-up and be able to hear it and have a conversation about it. If they're not, then that they're not the person to be working with or being with, because they're not mature enough to get feedback.
Right. And we always teach people to talk clear and kind.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be clear, but be kind. I don't have to say, I'm not going to tolerate that. No, I can say, you know what? That's not something that's acceptable to me.
It just that doesn't feel right for me. This is what comes up when that happens. Again, making me it's my experience. My experience of this situation. And when you spoke about something that you got pissed off about earlier, you said you were pissed off with the situation. That's an important distinction. You didn't say you were pissed off with the person. You were upset with the situation. And so I could speak about someone, I'm uncomfortable because this apparently is a boundary for me, and I need to share that with you. I'm not upset with you because you didn't know about it, but I have to tell you about this. This is my boundary on this. And we might not use the word boundary, but this is just not okay for me. We've got to somehow figure out how we're going to dance around this and deal with this openly.
I love that, because I do want to touch on that bit from the perspective of people out there looking for, because there's a lot of people looking for a partner, and from that perspective of finding the right person. But what you're saying too, and what Jennifer had said about, I hadn't made this connection with the online dating sites, and I just immediately jumped to dating. And it's like, because maybe that's how I just approach things. Talking with someone, oh, we're dating now. Maybe that was in my head unconsciously without thinking about it. But when we're talking about that, as you say, there's little triggers. If you're meeting the person, if you're met someone in person, you're having a conversation, you're starting to feel this emotional attraction, you can start paying attention to those key words. But then I was thinking the dating sites as well, as Jennifer had said that, I was thinking, I mean, if you go to a dating site, you've pretty much got a whole list of things. You mentioned about, smoking being on there, and there's a bunch. If they like dogs, it's like, oh, I don't like dogs. You've got all this information to know, not even to bother asking that person, to move to the next one very quickly. If that's your rigid rules, but that's the presupposition being there that you've actually gone through and done that task of working out what are your rigid boundaries. So with that, I mean, moving forward from that, you've got the boundaries, and what I want to talk about, you just mentioned about talking clear and being kind, and that give me flashbacks. So I have a little snippet of videos that I cut together from movies and other bits and pieces that inspire me, and you might remember, you'll certainly remember Patrick Swayze, I would imagine. And there's a movie he did called Roadhouse where he was a bouncer, and in that movie he gives his manifesto, which is really one key point as to how to do this job. And so as a bouncer, you would imagine it's pretty rough and tumble, but he goes, "We be nice, ask them to leave, be nice." And he goes through this process: be nice, be nice, be nice. How, from that perspective, if you're in that situation where you're feeling triggered, how can we tap into that and still stay and be nice, be kind, as you use the word that you used?
Well, we also, we teach a specific communication technique, which
Mm.
helps people understand how to communicate. I'm sorry, Stephanie's trying to reach for our power cord. Our laptop is telling us that it needs power. Is it in here?
That's fine.
Okay.
I can still hear
Anyway,
you.
so we teach a specific communication technique of, different steps that people take to help facilitate a conversation. And one of the steps is that if you start to feel as though you are getting angry or just your anxiety you're getting agitated, that you walk away for a little while and you take a break and you say to someone, you know what? I think we both need to take a little time to let our nervous systems reset, because once you're agitated, it takes at least 20 minutes for your nervous system to reset, for you to get out of that feeling of I'm up here and I need to bring myself back down here. So we teach people to walk away for a little bit and put it on the, set it aside on the shelf and say, you know what, can we come back to this in a little bit?
Yeah. So is it as simple as that? Is noticing within yourself where those triggers are happening, I'm starting to get a bit of tense now, and I need to go, okay, I'm going to take some time out and just come back in a minute. Should you also let the person know, saying, hey, because sometimes you have that with the other person, they're going, don't ignore me, and chase you down the hallway.
It really takes a lot of practice, and it takes both people to be on board. So when we're working with a couple, or if we're working with someone who's going to then take it back to their partner, we suggest that they share the whole process with them.
When they're not triggered.
When they're not triggered, which is, this is a process that I want us to go through when we're struggling. And we're going to go through it now on an issue that sometimes makes us struggle. But we're not upset. So I want to practice this.
Let's practice
we're not really upset.
Let's practice on, it upsets me when you don't put the cap on the toothpaste. Something that's really minor.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes you through owning it. So it irritates me when I find the cap off of the toothpaste. Yeah. So I didn't say who left it off. I just owned that I'm irritated when I find that.
Yeah.
And this is the reason I worry about germs, because usually there's a lot of germs in the bathroom. And when the kid goes in there and washes their hands, they make a mess. And then that mess is in our toothpaste.
They've been playing in the mud, making mud.
Right. So see how I've given, it's my issue. These are my experiences with it. And then the question is, how do we solve this? Do you have any ideas? So I'm bringing the person in as a problem-solving partner. I've pointed no fingers. I'm inviting them in to help me with this thing that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And then when the big issues happen, hopefully they've practiced enough that they can use that skill for when it's a big deal.
That's a pretty simple process. There's 3 steps to that, isn't it?
Right.
Really.
And if it goes awry, you go back to the beginning. So it could be 3 steps and 3 steps and 3 steps. But it is fairly simple.
And you give each person a chance to go through those steps each. So when the toothpaste is left off, this is how I feel. And then you ask them to go through that. How do you feel when this happens? And they may say, it doesn't bother me at all. I could care less when the toothpaste is off. The cap's off the toothpaste. And then why does it not make them feel, and all of their steps? And then you can come to, okay, well, what can we do so we're both not upset? Neither one of us are upset when this happens.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. Very, very straightforward. Yeah, this is how I feel. Ask them, for their input, and then how do we solve that problem? It's very basic. I love that. Now, I want to move on to, and we've covered this, but I want to bring it back under that nutshell, because you talk about being your authentic self, and a lot of this, what we talked about, falls under that category. But you want to bring that all back together about finding your authentic self, being your authentic self. Do you want to? I'll let you lead on that, but do you want to talk about the authentic self and why that's important?
Well, the most important piece of finding your authentic self is being able to do that because we as a society there are so many rules and so many regulations that are put upon us from the moment we are conceived. Before we're even birthed, there's already rules. Then you're birthed, and now there's even more rules.
And
There's
expectations.
rules and expectations of, boys don't cry, girls don't get dirty. I mean, and then you go to school and there's more and there's more and there's more. And who are we except fitting into this box of what's expected of us? And that is not who we're meant to be. We're meant to be who God created us to be. And the only way to do that is to get through all of the conditioning that was put upon us and find who we're authentically meant to be. And I know for me, I'm authentically meant to be this person who is teaching other people how to find their authentic self. That's not what everybody else is meant to be, but I feel that is my purpose in this world, is to be authentic and teach other people how to be authentic.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do that until I got through all of the conditioning of, well, you're supposed to be this and you're supposed to be that. And society said this and your mom said this and school says this. And now you're disabled. So now there's all these rules you have to follow because of that. And it put me in bed where I couldn't lift my head off a pillow. That isn't the way I wanted to live the rest of my life.
Yeah. So being your authentic self, is that really just setting your own rules for your own life? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it really is. It's determining what works for you and what makes you truly happy. What it allows you to be a loving being.
Yeah. Okay. Stephanie, you've got some thoughts there by the looks of it.
Yes, and just expanding upon what Jennifer said a little bit, and your question, does that mean you get to make your own rules? I think the difference is that what Jennifer was talking about, so we make the distinction between the conditioned self and the authentic self. And the conditioned self is the one who has been created by all of the expectations of society. So as a little girl, I was dressed a certain way. I was expected to behave a certain way. When I got to school, there were certain expectations about me as a student. And so I believed that to be loved and valued, I needed to do those things.
Yeah.
And so, like for Jennifer, when she couldn't do those things that meant she was loved and valued, she had no sense of self.
And I didn't feel loved and valued anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we get in touch with our authentic self and that self-love piece, we are connected with the laws and expectations of the cosmos, the creator. Those spiritual laws, and like I don't remember what you called them, but those like
principles?
the principles, yes.
Yeah.
And when we alchemize all of the things down to those simple principles, and we live by those instead of the hundreds and thousands of expectations that we were trying to live within as the conditioned self, that's confusing. There's hundreds of thousands of opinions. And if we're trying to live within all of them, how in the world can we be in integrity? Because my mom wants me to behave in one way, and my friends expect me to behave in another way, because they're completely different.
Yeah.
So who am I? But then when we get into those principles and those laws of the universe, there's like 12. And there's a whole lot of like realness to them. And I can understand who I am in regard to those.
Yeah.
And so that self-love, that authentic self now knows who I am, because I'm not bouncing around, because those 12 laws actually work together. They're not in opposition, where the conditions are. Very often, those conditions are very much in opposition.
Yeah.
So now there's so much clarity.
Right. And it doesn't mean that we don't still have rules that we have to follow. I still have to drive on the right side of the road, or else I'm going to cause a car accident.
I think you guys are on the wrong side of the road. We're on the right side. You're on the right
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
I have to drive on the correct side of the road.
Be agreed upon.
So, but if I go to your country and I drive on what I think is the correct side of the road, I'm going to kill somebody in your country. Well, so I have to know the rules of yours.
And isn't that a perfect boundary conversation? We need to know the boundaries of the land.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we must communicate them.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to get, because I love that. And I want to touch on the spirituality component, because you brought that up a few times. But this having this higher set of principles, which is why in eSHAIR.care we went and recreated the Knights Code, because we're looking at, it's gender neutral and from a modern age, but a lot of those, if you've got some key principles to aspire to, and just because you could doesn't mean you should. It's what am I sticking with those principles of and that's easier to remember, because I love that you've got you mentioned 12 key principles, and that's where I wanted to come back to, because you've mentioned it a few times, and you mentioned in your material, you talk about the spiritual path. Do you want to expand on that and how that has become, well, it sounds like it's become a foundation for what you're doing and the work that you do and how you connect? Do you want to expand on what you mean by the spiritual path that you went on and how that has impacted on your life?
You can start.
As I said earlier, my life has very much been centered around my spiritual connection. It's just something that's always been a seed that has been growing within me. And there's so much clarity when after Jennifer and I split up and we were in our intermission, and I found another teaching and another layer and another level of spiritual awakening for myself. It just became the thing that I am called to talk about and to aspire to and to live as. And I believe that there's two things that we are wired for as humans. One is that we are wired for connection.
Yeah.
And the other, they're actually connected. They're the same. Yeah. So there's one principle. We are wired for connection. Our deepest human need is for connection. And I believe part of that is with a higher power, a creator, that thing that connects us all. From a quantum physics perspective, it's that energetic, interconnected web of life. I believe that is understanding that and being connected with that is what brings us joy.
Yeah.
And if we don't lean into that, at least to some degree, and I don't mean anybody needs to be as all in as I am, but just to realize that there's something bigger than us uniting us all, I think that is something that is so powerful to us as humans and to the work that we want to do, that we do.
Yeah, I love that. Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it gave me my life back. And I want people to realize that there is always hope out there, no matter how difficult your path may be, that if you allow yourself to connect with something bigger than you, that there is always hope that things can change and be better. And that we can't get stuck feeling as though we're a victim of the world, because we're creating our world.
Yeah.
And that I have all the power within me to determine how I'm going to react to any situation and event in front of me.
Yeah.
For example, a death of a child to some people is absolutely could destroy their whole being.
Yeah.
Yet if you look at it at a spiritual level, that child already has done everything that they need to do on this plane, and it's time for them to go back into the cosmos so they can do something bigger and better as a soul. Then it looks different and it feels different. And I'm not saying it doesn't hurt when you see a child get taken. But if you can look at it on a spiritual perspective like that, then it helps people heal and realize that someone is never gone, that you still have that soul connection. You know, I lost my mother at a young age, and I still have an amazing connection with her. I have a better relationship with my mother now, and she's been gone for almost 16 years because I have that spiritual connection with her. And so we have to allow ourselves to have that connection with all that is out there.
Yeah. Do you think that spiritual connection, what makes that really special is because when we look around us, and what we experience as beings now, when we look at, say, scarcity, which is where I'm heading with that, is that it's limited. But when we look at, when we talk about love being unconditional and love being unlimited, that infinity concept for a physical being is, I would imagine, well, I feel it is very difficult to comprehend what forever means. Do you think tapping into that spiritual element gives us a way of connecting to, hey, the love that I've got all this love in here, it's unlimited, so I can do that. My cup is not going to run out because it's unlimited. Is that part of what you think helps that process, this connection? And then when you're connecting to what Jennifer had said, where there's always hope because it is unlimited, and it enables us, the spiritual connection gives us a concept of what unlimited means.
Absolutely, 100%. That's what's given me the ability to understand that we live in an unlimited world and that everything has the ability to be unlimited. It's just a matter of the connection and knowing that there is something bigger than ourselves out there, and that because of that, we live in an unlimited world.
Yeah. Is that like if we take that even into a physical aspect? I mean, the context I'm putting it is if we look at the sun that emits energy, and from what I understand, and I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but the amount of energy that hits the planet, that just hits the planet in any given moment, is enough to power the entire planet for decades. And that's just the energy that hits the planet, not the energy it's emitting. And from that perspective, having the spiritual understanding or connection with that spiritual component gives us that perspective to look beyond. Okay, we look at it and go, oh, there's a limited component. But when we look at, we're talking about, and obviously energy is a big topic at the moment. But when we look at it and go, well, actually, the amount of energy that's out there, if we actually learn how to tap into that, those problems go further. And then when we take it a step further, and maybe I've watched Star Trek too many times, but when we talk about the matter transfer, energy is transfer from one to the other. So to create that, tapping into that, all of a sudden scarcity disappears completely, because we can just transfer. When you look at how much power is in one sun of how many that are out there, and transferring that energy to create food and all that kind of things, I mean, beyond even just in a physical form, is quite profound when we're talking about a scarcity component. Do you think that, and that's why I'm coming back to Jennifer's point about creating hope, looking at that and going, well, actually, there's all this out there. We just need to tap into it. Is that where you're heading to with that? Or because that's my take on it.
I think that there's something to that. It's definitely connected. In terms of relationships, we talk about how, every relationship that we're in, it lasts for a reason, or it shows up for a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so any relationship that we're in, no matter how short, gives us something. It gives us an understanding of how intense love can be for such a short time, and how that person has unending impact on our life forever because they were here. So, well, then what was limited about that relationship is the question. Well, it was just time limited.
Yeah.
It wasn't impact limited. And so how is it that that person is still showing up in my life?
Yeah.
It's not just a memory, because things are still active. I still care.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a limited amount of caring for that person.
Yeah.
So we start to look at these things and these bigger truths, and it does start to alter that idea of scarcity.
Yeah.
And we start to question that, and we start to question what the truth is. And we think, oh, well, maybe that's not the only truth. Maybe there's more to the story.
Yeah.
And like, okay, my heart was broken by that person, but now a couple of years later, thank goodness they dumped me, because, oh my gosh, they opened up the space for this other person to come in. So they were here for a reason and a season.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful, because I grew out of that phase of my life, and now I have grown and I'm available for something new. And so it all starts to work. We start seeing the interconnections, and that's when you really start to trust that there's more than meets the eye
to every relationship.
Trust. Yeah.
Yes.
Trust is really important.
Trust and hope, because there's more than meets the eye. So we get curious about the world, and we get curious about the cosmos. And now there's not so many limitations.
Yeah. I love that.
Consciousness rises.
We've shared so much, or you've shared so much valuable information. Could you want to tell us about, the work that you specifically do? So this is your product placement. I don't like ads, but product placement, I'm fine with. So do you want to tell us about the work that you do, how people can contact you? And we'll put that in the show notes. But do you want to just give us a bit of a rundown of the work you do? Do you work one-on-one? Do you do group sessions? And how people reach you?
Well, I'd like to first, kind of wrap all the things that we've talked about. We work specifically with the LGBT community, because as a minority community, we are seen as less than. We often see ourselves as less than because of everything we've had to go through. And so many of us have had people turn away from us when we found out our truth. And so there's a lot of healing to do from that. And so that is, obviously we are in a same-sex coupling, so we get it, and we always should work with the people who we make sure we get the best. And I think we get a lot of people the best, but definitely feel that this niche of the LGBTQ plus community is so important, because people aren't doing this work, to help the LGBTQ, and actually, I just like to do the queer community, heal from the trauma of being queer and having to come out in this heteronormative world. And so all the things we have talked about, that any of us can have had the experience of childhood trauma, of relationship problems, all of those things are a universal thing. But then when you're queer, there is another layer added to it. There's having to hide at work, because you don't know all the people that you're going to be connected with. And you don't know. I still don't like to go into churches. It makes me nervous. I don't know what the feeling is of the people there. And I'm scared. And so
having to come out all the time. Right. That's not something people in the heteronormative society have to deal with.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to walk into a room and wonder if people are going to persecute you for being straight. It's just different. Not better, not worse, just different. So that is who we work with. And we do work with individuals and couples. We do a lot of group work because there's so much healing in the group. But sometimes we need individual work too. So we do a little bit of individual, a lot of group, because there's so much power when the three of us are here working together, we're all healing in this conversation. So when you get a small group of people together who are about the business of healing, healing definitely happens.
Yeah.
And we all learn from each other. It's amazing what happens in a group.
Very powerful. So we have a Facebook group called Enchanted Awakenings. Yeah. Our website is enchantedawakenings.org. We're a nonprofit. So our mission is about bringing more love to the world, one relationship at a time.
Yeah.
And so we do that by helping facilitate relationships within our groups.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our work is on Patreon. So we have a Patreon channel. So people can follow us on Patreon. Again, Enchanted Awakenings is the name of our Patreon channel, but they can also find that right on our website. There's a link right to Patreon from our website, where they can see how they can work with us, and they can choose to work with us just by following us, joining some of our groups, all the way up to weekly one-on-one coaching. So we have all different levels in which we work with people depending on where their need is and what they desire.
Love that. Yeah, we'll put all those details in the show notes as well for them to reach out to you. It's been really fabulous having you on the show. There's just so much depth there and so much help and passion that you've shared. And I really love the work that you're doing to help people, all people, including specifically the gay. I haven't got the acronym there. I'm not the queer, as you say.
Okay.
the queer community.
I have lots of friends that anyway, we'll go. We could date. I love all people. From that perspective, though, before we go, I'd love for you to share what would be your key takeaway, your key wisdom or wisdoms that you would want the audience to take away. What would be the nugget of information, one or many things? What would you like to share?
I say for me is that know that you're worth it. No matter what society may have dealt for you, whether you feel like you're a victim, not a victim, know that you're not, and that you are worth it, and that you are worth whatever it takes to take care of you first and foremost. Because if you love yourself and know who you truly are, then you know what you have to offer somebody else.
Yeah, I love that. Stephanie?
I would say, and I mentioned it before, that our main need, one of the biggest needs of us as humans, is to be deeply connected with other people. So honor that. Honor that desire in you. And if there are other things that are getting in the way, maybe you need to prioritize things differently. And we would be happy to help you figure that out.
Love that. Love that as well. Jennifer and Stephanie, it has been such a pleasure. I know we've had a long show, but it's been there's so much value here, and I'd love to have further discussions with you in the future. But thank you very much for making the time and being on the show and sharing with our listeners.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Such a joy.
Yeah, this has been amazing.
I love having these deep conversations. So thank you for creating a space for that.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes for others and for you.